Since TikTok already struck this down, I need to be clear. This video is being made for educational purposes. In my previous series, we talked about politicians who benefit from gun lobby money, and we talked about the laws that those politicians have passed that enable the gun violence. And in this series, we're going to be talking about the politicians that play a role in the subjugation of the Palestinian people. But before we can start showing faces and naming names and putting dollar amounts to those names and faces, we must first understand the historical context. So watch this video, and then in my next video, we'll get into the roasting.
So to properly understand what has led to what we're seeing in Gaza, it's important to have a baseline grasp of the history so we can understand what got us here, because contrary to many narratives being pushed right now, history did not start a few days ago, and what we're seeing has been decades in the making. First, though, it's important to get an idea of what the Gaza Strip actually looks like so you can get an idea of what people are talking about when they reference it. Situated on the Mediterranean coast, the Gaza Strip is an ancient trade and seaport about 365 square kilometers or 141 square miles. Within that territory is about 2.3 million people, the majority of which are under the age of 25, with over half of them being under the age of 18, and the majority of them also being refugees. This strip can be broken down into a number of sections: North Gaza, Gaza City, Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis, and Rafah, all of which are cumulatively surrounded by an air, land, and sea blockade that I'll talk about more in a second. North Gaza is home to 440,000 people and extends for 10 kilometers or 6 miles, and shares the only crossing into so-called Israel through Bet Hanun, also known as the Eretz Crossing. North Gaza is also home to the Jabalia refugee camp, the largest of multiple refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. Gaza City is the largest and most populous city within the Gaza Strip, with more than 750,000 residents. Gaza City contains a lot of people, but also notably the Al-Shifa Hospital, which is the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip, multiple pediatric hospitals, and the Shati refugee camp. Deir al-Balah is home to 320,000 people and is one of Gaza's largest agricultural producers. It is also home to 4 refugee camps: Nuseirat, Al-Barij, Al-Maghazi, and Deir al-Balah. Gaza's only operating power plant is also located along this district's boundary with Gaza City, a power plant that as of today is no longer operational as Israeli blockades have cut off fuel, food, water, and electricity to the entire strip. Khan Yunis is home to about 430,000 people. At its center is the Khan Yunis refugee camp, where about 90,000 people live. And Rafah is the southernmost district of Gaza with a population of about 275,000 people. Rafah is also the name of the crossing with Egypt that is located there, as well as the refugee camp that sits on the southern part of the district. Notably, Rafah is also the former location of the Gaza airport, a civilian airport that came out of the Oslo II agreement of 1995. It was built with funding from Japan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Spain, and Germany, and operated for a number of years into the early 2000s. The beginning of the end to this airport was February 13, 2001, when Israel demanded the airport stop all civilian air traffic. Israeli airstrikes later destroyed the airport's radar station and control tower on December 4, 2001, and bulldozers cut the runway on January 10, 2002. Something you might have noticed in these diagrams is that there are a lot of refugees in Gaza. To understand that, we have to go back to the 1940s. In the early 1940s, Zionist militias put together a series of operational plans known cumulatively as Plan Delete or Plan D. These plans were part of a larger preparation for the mass depopulation of territory Zionists wished to colonize to create what they considered to be more favorable ethnic compositions for themselves, which in function meant ethnically cleansing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians living in those lands. Plan D began being executed around 1947, and by 1949, only 2 years later, over 750,000 Palestinians had been ethnically cleansed from over 520 cities, towns, and villages. They became refugees in several countries, including Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt, but also in different places in historic Palestine itself, notably the Gaza Strip. Now, ordinarily, these refugees would be able to exercise their internationally recognized right of return, but Israel refuses to grant them that as Israeli officials consider them to be a demographic threat, and so they and their descendants have remained refugees, which is why around 70% of Gaza's population are refugees. Following the 1967 war, the Gaza Strip came under Israeli military occupation. That occupation has led to systematic human rights violations, including forcing people off their land, destroying homes, and crushing even non-violent forms of political dissent. But things changed in 2005 when Palestinian resistance groups were able to force a unilateral withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip. With the end of direct colonization within the Gaza Strip, however, came the later imposition of a total air, land, and sea blockade that largely cut Gaza off from the rest of the world, turning the home of millions into the world's largest open-air prison. The blockade, which is still in effect today, limits the import of food, fuel, and construction materials, limits how far Gaza's fishermen can go out to sea, bans almost all exports, and imposes strict limitations on the movement of people into and out of Gaza. And the years of closure have devastated the lives of Palestinians in Gaza. Gaza's inhabitants don't have enough water for drinking and sanitation, with 97% of Gaza's drinking water being considered unfit for human consumption. They also face electricity cuts that run 12 to 18 hours each day. And without adequate water, electricity, and construction materials, Gaza's fragile healthcare system has consistently been on the brink of collapse, only further complicated by Israel's routine denial of permits to sick Palestinian patients when they need to receive medical care outside of Gaza. Now, it has to be clarified that this blockade is illegal under international law, as it amounts to collective punishment of the Palestinians of Gaza, which is a violation of the Hague Conventions and the Geneva Conventions that form the backbone of international law. But to that end, Israel has never really cared about international law, and why would they with allies like the United States that are able to protect them from any repercussions while giving them billions of dollars in military aid? All of this is further complicated by decades of military efforts by Israel that have led to the destruction of civilian infrastructure across the Gaza Strip, including apartment buildings, mosques, water sanitation facilities, hospitals, and more. This assault has been ongoing for a decade and a half now, with large-scale escalations happening in 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021, and now 2023, in efforts to destroy the military capabilities of Palestinian resistance groups that have existed in the Gaza Strip as a defensive force against Israeli colonial ambitions. These assaults have led to the deaths of thousands of Palestinians, including the deaths of over 1,000 children and injuries to thousands more, as well as total devastation for the Palestinian people who, due to the blockade, oftentimes cannot even get the necessary building materials and supplies to repair the damage, let alone meet the needs of the millions of people who call Gaza home. Palestinians in this period have resisted the blockade both peacefully and otherwise, with one notable protest being the Great March of Return demonstrations, where thousands of Palestinians marched to the wall Israel erected around Gaza to protest its existence. Israel responded to those peaceful demonstrations with horrific violence, killing 266 people, 50 of them being children, wounding over 30,000, damaging multiple ambulances, and tear-gassing crowds en masse. These conditions are genuinely indescribable, right? For a second, imagine being someone in these circumstances. You live every moment of your life barely able to scrape by, living day to day, wondering if this will be the last day you live, if it's the last day you'll see your friends, if it's the last day you'll see your family. Israel has created a living hell through its actions, and one that, given the history, Palestinians are understandably very desperate to get out of. When you lock millions of people away and starve them for over a decade, they will do everything they can to stave off their own annihilation, to be free. This is the context with which we find our current flare-up, and one that should guide our understanding of why things are happening and why the fundamental at-fault party is resoundingly the Israeli settler colonial project. But yeah, just some context worth thinking on. As always, free Palestine, and have a great day.